Oh, the lovely, the wonderful Briahna Joy Gray. Gonna drop some knowledge for us here. Hope everyone already knows who Briahna Joy Gray is. This next story that we're going to talk about, this is just a quick clip that I want to show from a recent appearance by Briahna Joy Gray on the Katie Halper show. And on it, she discussed some of the blowback and fallout from her interview with that on the Bad Faith podcast that she does with Virgil Texas from Chapo Trap House. Briahna Joy Gray and Virgil Texas have a really great new podcast called the Bad Faith Podcast, and they recently interviewed Noam Chomsky about debating the issue of voting for the lesser of two evils versus the merits of withholding your vote and demanding something in exchange for your vote instead of just handing over your vote to politicians who turn around and don't seemingly, give you anything for that vote that you've already handed over to them. So this is going to be Briahna Joy Gray talking about the issue of accelerationism and the idea of, the concept, the ideas of accelerationism versus the lesser of two evils, and also on the likelihood that we are able to push Joe Biden to the left on any substantive issue here.
I tweeted this the other day. Nathan Robinson and Benjamin Studebaker had a debate about, whether or not one should vote for Biden, and Studebaker took a little bit more of the accelerationist approach. And to me, the fundamental issue is that we don't know whether accelerationism works, right? It's not, we don't know for sure whether a second term of Trump will yield the results that we would hope in terms of radicalizing the public. Right. And given the unknown and given the enormous risk of Trump, it makes sense to say, okay, well, let me just not even gamble with people's lives that way. Let me go ahead and vote for Biden or at least not vote for Trump. Like, I completely understand that argument. But if you are taking that approach, I think it's incumbent on you to do the work to lay out the ground plan for how you're going to get away the very real risk of voter apathy. And the people who want to talk about, voting for Biden and vote no matter who and non-accelerationism and all of these things and how we need to do activism, but who never say a single word about what the activism looks like, or won't entertain using the threat of building small electoral coalitions in key states to force whoever the Democratic nominee is 4 years, 8 years from now to do better than what they've done currently. I have there's a credibility gulf. And that's what I wanted to hear from Chomsky, not, oh, no, you're right, don't vote for Biden. No, that wasn't an argument at all. What I wanted to hear was, okay, this is how we're going to hold people accountable, because the ways in which we've been trying it haven't worked, including during the biggest public uprising, the biggest protest movement in American history, which had zero effect, frankly, if we're going to be really honest, had little to no effect on Joe Biden during the course of the last 6 months.
Yeah, so that was Briahna Joy Gray. That was Bernie Sanders, the press secretary, national press secretary for Bernie Sanders, a young Black woman, explaining, her stance on this and just saying, she had Noam Chomsky on, and it created this huge controversy because Noam Chomsky essentially went on there and was acting like anyone who doesn't agree with his position is just a moron. They're stupid. They're immature. They're childish. We have a childish way of thinking. And it was really condescending and just not the way that you would think. You're on there to try to move people, to try to sway people into your way of thinking. And Noam Chomsky has been one of the greatest public intellectuals. I constantly reference him. I have nothing but the utmost respect for Noam Chomsky. But his position here, I don't think that it's a reasonable one to be treating people the way that he's treating people that disagree with him on this issue. I think that he has shown that he's willing to entertain much, these not, truly bad faith arguments. I know the podcast is called Bad Faith, but they really weren't making a bad faith argument. It was actually a good faith argument that they were trying to make, as Briahna Joy Gray laid out there. And the issue really here is, and this was the point that Briahna Joy Gray made that was so important, that and I'm gonna show a story that I hope will really hammer this point home. I hope that our next story will really hammer that point home. But what Briahna Joy Gray said here was crucial. She talked about the fact that, listen, we just had the biggest uprisings in the country, the biggest social unrest in this country and mass protests, the largest mass protest movement in this country since the civil rights era. And with all of those mass protests, that was not enough to move Biden even an inch to the left on any substantive policy, not on the issue of police brutality, on defunding the police, on any of those issues. Biden did not shift he did not budge an inch to the left. And we just had mass protests. People took to the streets, risking their lives. I was one of them. I carried that sign out there during a George Floyd protest, during people were out there. We were out there. And, again, at great risk to ourselves, to our communities, to have to be out there protesting in the middle of a pandemic. And people took to the streets, not just in this country, but all around the world. People took to the streets. If all of that happened and Joe Biden still wasn't willing to move to the left, and this is before an election, before he has any power, all he has to do is say that he supports these ideas. Just say that you support Medicare for all. I mean, we just had tens of millions of Americans fired from their jobs and thrown off of their health insurance in the middle of a global pandemic. And that wasn't enough to move Joe Biden to the left on that issue. He still says he does not support Medicare for all. The furthest he will go is a public option, which we all should know by now is a Trojan horse that will destroy the any sort of progress that we make towards universal healthcare will be destroyed by a public option, because the way that the public option will work, let me just quickly touch on this. The way that the public option, what it will do is if we have a public option while we still leave private employer-based healthcare and private based health insurance intact, if we leave that intact and then just simply add a public option onto that already cumbersome system, what does that do? All that does is, one, it doesn't fix any of the underlying issues of our current private health insurance system, which is all the administrative costs. It's about 17 or 18% of all costs are administrative costs. In a universal healthcare system, it's somewhere between 2 to 4%. So we're talking about, damn near 10 times less costs for administrative costs. And that money, that can all go towards care instead of towards, administration of the care. And so, so what happens when you add a public option into that system is that the private insurers, they do everything they can. They now have an option they have a way to push people off of their insurance, because they say they'll find every little loophole in the book and they'll find every reason to push all the highest risk people off of their health insurance. Why? Because the highest risk people are to create the highest costs for health insurance companies. And so the only way that a sane health insurance system works is if everybody pays in. The healthy have to pay in, just as well as the sick, but the healthy have to pay in as well. And that's the only way the system works. If we put all the burden on the sick people, then there's just, the costs are too high for that small group of people. We all should have the protection and the care just in case anything happens. That's how a sane moral system would work. But when you just add the public option in on top of that, all it does is it allows insurance companies to push, customers. I shouldn't even be able to use the word customer inside of a health industry. Shouldn't be able to use the word industry in the word healthcare. Those things should not be in the same sentence. But you incentivize health insurance companies to push people off of their insurance, all the highest risk individuals off of the insurance and onto a public option. And then what then happens is that public option becomes unsustainable because all the sickest people are using it. So the cost for that public option skyrocket because it's all the sickest people being pushed onto it. And then what happens is the Republicans then turn around and they say, look at what just happened. We just did your so-called, because we know the way that the Democrats are going to brand this and advertise it as if they're providing universal health care. They're going to say, this is our universal health care plan. They're going to say it's Medicare for all who want it. And so then the Republicans are going to come in and they're going to say, oh, look at, you guys did Medicare for all. You did Medicare for all who wanted it. Medicare for all doesn't work. Universal health care doesn't work. All it did was drive up costs for everybody for the entirety of the system and pushed even more people off of their regular health insurance. So they'll turn around and they will use it as a cudgel against the left, and say, look, we tried that policy and that policy failed. So putting out a public option is not any kind of option at all. And so, we just went through, so sorry for that aside, but that being said, we just went through all of that. We just went through mass protests in the wake of the George Floyd, lynching by police. We went through mass protests. and people took to the streets. And where does Biden stand on the issue of defunding the police now? He's just said in the last debate that he wants to increase funding to police. So he's not out there trying to defund police. He's not out there trying to make any sort of fundamental system change. He's just saying more of the same, and actually, in fact, we'll give him even more money. And so he hasn't been moved on to left on this. So if you really believe, to all the people out there that say, okay, well, we'll get Biden elected and then we'll push him left after he's elected, that's the big plan. Well, I think, as Briahna Joy Gray said here, it's really incumbent upon those people to then make the argument, at least make the case. It's your job. If you feel that way, then you got to make the case to me. Feel free to make the case in the comments over there. If you're one of these folks that feel like you got to vote blue no matter who, or, vote for Biden and then push him left afterward, please let me know in the comments how you think we're going to go about doing that. Because if your answer is mass protests, well, my answer to you is, did you just see what just happened? Because we just tried that, dude, and it didn't work. It didn't work one bit. So it didn't move them anywhere. It didn't move him. And if anything, it moved him further towards his, he just, dug into his positions that he already held. So you explain to me how a one-term president, Joe Biden, who already indicated that he only plans to serve one single term as president, you tell me what incentive a one-term president has to fight for policy that he doesn't believe in, or Kamala Harris. You think Kamala Harris is going to do it? Check out the segment we did on Kamala Harris earlier. She already done told you where she's going to be on Medicare for all, or Green New Deal, or legalizing cannabis. I mean, legalizing weed would be one of the most basic things. Legalize cannabis and cash bail would be the type of reforms that would actually be substantive reforms for criminal justice reforms. There's no talk of that. Even after all of those protests, we went and we protested. We were out there in the streets the whole damn summer, and it still wasn't enough. So please explain to me, folks, if you're in this camp, you got to explain to me why. What's the activism going to look like? What does it look like? How are we pushing Biden to the left? What are we doing to push Biden to the left? Because mass protests ain't going to cut it. So what the hell else? What are our other tools?